Have you ever felt it? A deep, resonant knowing that the world you've been shown is not the whole truth. That the freedom you've been promised feels more like a beautifully decorated cage, a grand stage where you are given a script, but never the power to write your own lines. If this message has found you, it is not by chance. It is a sign, a frequency calling to your awakening soul. You are beginning to see through the grand illusion, the most seductive and carefully constructed performance in human history. Your spirit is stirring, recognizing that the power you've been told is out there, in a ballot box, has always resided within you. This is not a political message. This is a spiritual revelation. If you feel this deep in your soul, if you sense the vibration of this truth, let the universe know by liking, subscribing, and sharing your journey in the comments. Affirm your awakening by simply typing, "I see it," 111 or 777, and connect with the other souls who are also opening their eyes. Let us speak of a truth, an ancient vibration that echoes through millennia, a wisdom whispered by the masters of old. It begins with a quote, not a fleeting tweet, but a profound observation from Aristotle. Democracy is when the indigent, and not the men of property, are the rulers. Now, feel into that. This isn't sarcasm from a bygone era. This is a diagnostic key offered 2,300 years ago. It's a frequency that unlocks a deeper understanding of the world we inhabit. We have been initiated into a belief system, a collective agreement that democracy is the ultimate expression of human freedom. We are taught to chant its virtues, the power of the people, the sanctity of choice, the glory of freedom, the unassailable right to vote, the sacred ground of free speech. But what if this entire construct, this temple we have been taught to worship, was built on a foundation of illusion? What if your vote, the very symbol of your power, was never truly yours to begin with? What if the greatest sleight of hand, the most magnificent trick of control, is the very act of letting you pick between two doors, two paths, two faces, both of which were designed by an unseen architect? What if this illusion of choice is the very mechanism that keeps your soul in alignment with a lower frequency, a vibration of servitude, without you ever realizing it? This is the invisible chain, the wall-less prison. It's the system that doesn't need force when it has your consent, a consent manufactured through the very illusion of freedom itself. There was a soul, a beacon of light in the ancient world, who saw this coming, Plato, a name synonymous with the very foundation of Western philosophy. He was not a distant academic theorizing from an ivory tower. No, he was a witness. He was a man whose spirit lived through the visceral, heartbreaking collapse of a democratic Athens. He watched the great experiment in freedom devour itself from within. And so, he did not celebrate this system. He did not sing its praises. Instead, he placed it upon the alchemical table of his mind and dissected it layer by layer, truth by truth. And in its heart, he discovered a poison, a truth so potent, so dangerously illuminating, that even today, centuries later, most souls refuse to look at it. They turn away. Why? Because it challenges everything you have ever been taught to believe about your world, about your power, about your freedom. It asks you to question the very stage upon which you have been performing your life. This truth, this divine guidance he left for us, is a key, and today we will use that key to unlock the door of our own perception. Understand this: Plato did not despise liberty, he revered it. What he feared, what he witnessed with his own eyes, was what happens when that sacred liberty becomes unmoored from wisdom, when freedom becomes a lawless, chaotic tempest of raw, untamed emotion. He watched in horror as his beloved Athens, the cradle of civilization, handed a microphone to the mob. And what did the mob do with this newfound power, this amplified voice? They used it to condemn and murder the wisest man among them. They used it to extinguish the light of his own teacher, Socrates. Think of this. Feel the gravity of this moment in human history. Socrates, a man whose entire existence was dedicated to reason, to the sacred art of logic, to uncovering the uncomfortable truths that lead to true awakening, was killed. And who was his executioner? It was not a singular tyrant, not a king in a golden crown. Number. He was condemned by the people. He was murdered by the very democracy that claimed to represent freedom. This was the cataclysmic event that triggered Plato's profound awakening. It was in that moment of despair that he received a crystal-clear vision. He realized that when every soul is granted equal power, but not every soul has cultivated equal wisdom, a catastrophic inversion occurs. The voices of the wise, the calm and centered frequencies of truth, are drowned out. They are silenced by the deafening roar of the emotional, the fearful, the ignorant. In this cacophony, the loudest, most charismatic, most emotionally manipulative voice always wins. He called this the birth of tyranny, but a new and insidious form of it, a tyranny that wears the mask of freedom, a slavery that celebrates its own chains. And here we stand, 2 millennia later, still celebrating the mask, still calling the cage freedom, still believing with all our hearts that we are in control, still mistaking the loudest noise for the voice of truth. You are given a vote, of course. It feels real, it feels tangible. But do you truly choose your leaders? Or do you merely choose between two meticulously polished masks, two carefully curated personas, both offered to you by the very same unseen machine? You think democracy is designed to protect you, the individual. But what if its true purpose is to protect the system itself? And how does it achieve this? By weaving you into its very fabric, by making you believe that you are an integral, powerful part of it. You think your voice matters, that your opinion counts. And it does, but only so long as it harmonizes with the pre-approved frequency, only if you say what the majority consciousness already feels and believes. But dare to vibrate differently. Dare to speak a truth that challenges the collective narrative. And what happens? You are labeled. You are categorized. Dangerous. A threat. An extremist. Anti-this. Anti-that. Anti. Everything that the comfortable illusion stands for. In Plato's world, this is not the functioning of a divine democracy. This is the symptom of a mass delusion. It is a collective hallucination, a shared dream where feelings are more real than facts, and popularity becomes the ultimate replacement for truth. He warned us, with the clarity of a prophet, that the people, the crowd, the mass consciousness will always, without fail, choose the most charming liar. Why? Because the soul of the crowd does not yearn for wisdom. It craves comfort. It does not seek the challenging path of truth. It seeks the soothing balm of reassurance. It desires a sugar-coated speech, a pleasing narrative wrapped in the familiar flag of national pride. The crowd doesn't want to be challenged. It wants to feel seen, validated, and told that its current beliefs and feelings are righteous. And so, we elect performers. We elevate influencers. We follow the prophets of dopamine, the masters of the soundbite men and women who have perfected the art of telling us exactly what we already believe. They sell us the fantasy that we, as individuals, matter, while simultaneously herding us into predictable pens of thought and emotion. Do not be mistaken. This is not a new phenomenon. It's an ancient pattern of control. The only difference now is that it's louder, faster, more pervasive. Because now, your deepest fears are not just intuited, they are tracked by algorithms. Your outrage is not just a reaction, it is farmed for attention and profit. Your vote is not just a choice, it is a data point, modeled, simulated, and optimized by unseen forces long before you ever step into the booth. Plato saw all of this without the internet, without big data, without social media or polling firms. He didn't need them. He simply studied the one constant throughout human history, the soul of the crowd. He saw its shadow, its hunger, its inherent danger. That's why he didn't just critique democracy. He fundamentally mistrusted its very foundation, because he understood that it inevitably becomes the most seductive lie, the lie that the crowd is wise. The moment you believe that, the moment you surrender your individual reason to the collective emotion, the game is lost. But here is the profound truth that can set you free. The crowd doesn't think. It feels. It doesn't reason. It reacts. It doesn't navigate. It follows. And that, my friend, is how true freedom dies. Not in the silence of tyranny, but in the thunderous applause of a cheering, self-deceived crowd. So, I must ask you the uncomfortable question, the one that Plato dared to ask centuries ago. Are you really free? Or are you simply voting for the version of the cage that feels the least claustrophobic? Because the system of democracy, as you have been taught to see it, is not freedom itself. It is the performance of freedom. It is the costume, the stage, the grand theater. And once you truly see the script for what it is, you will never be able to clap on cue again. Stay with me now, for this is where the path gets darker, but also where the true light begins to break through. Plato's insights didn't come from a place of abstract theory. He was on the ground. He watched his world, the beacon of civilization, crumble and fall apart with his own eyes. He lived through the collapse of Athens, a city devoured not by a foreign invader, but by its own internal delusions. He saw firsthand what happens when an entire nation trades its spiritual currency of wisdom for the fleeting counterfeit coin of popularity. He saw them trade truth for entertainment and self-restraint for the intoxicating chaos of raw emotion. And the diagnosis he made of his civilization still terrifies us today, because it wasn't just a political critique, it was a psychological and spiritual diagnosis of the human collective, of the crowd itself. In his masterpiece, The Republic, Plato didn't just praise democracy, he dismantled it, meticulously, layer by layer, floor by floor. He described it as the most seductive, yet also the most unstable, form of government. A society where people tragically mistake freedom for wisdom and equality for truth. He warned that democracy, by its very nature, inevitably leads to tyranny, not by some unforeseen accident, but by its inherent design. He used one of the most haunting metaphors ever written, the ship of state. Imagine, he said, a vessel at sea. The crew, representing the citizens, are all fighting amongst themselves. Each sailor believes he should be the captain, not because he knows how to navigate, but simply because he desires the power. They argue, they scream, they fight over the ship's wheel. But none of them have studied the stars. None of them understand the currents. None can even read a compass. They only know how to shout the loudest. Meanwhile, the true navigator, the one person who actually possesses the wisdom to guide the ship safely to harbor the philosopher, is ignored. He is mocked. They label him a useless stargazer, too quiet, too complicated, out of touch with their immediate desires. And so, the ship drifts, leaderless, directionless, utterly vulnerable to the first storm that appears on the horizon. That ship, Plato warned, is democracy. It is a regime where feelings steer the wheel, not knowledge. A system where every voice is given equal weight, but not every mind is equally prepared to use it. He called this the wild freedom, the kind that sounds noble but has no inner discipline. It's the kind of freedom that leads people to confuse their desires with truth and their liberty with chaos. And once the crowd grows tired of the constant noise, once the endless promises wear thin, once the confusion and chaos curdle into fear, what do? They cry out. They demand order. And who is it that answers that desperate call? The tyrant. Plato wrote that tyranny does not emerge from the ashes of a monarchy. It grows directly out of the soil of a decaying democracy. When people, exhausted by too much freedom, willingly hand over their power to the one strong man who promises to fix it all. And understand this critical point. This figure doesn't rise through force alone. He rises through flattery. He tells the people exactly what they want to hear. He blames the elites. He praises the poor. He speaks in simple, emotional lines that echo their deepest feelings. And they cheer him. They clap for him. They hand him the keys to the kingdom, completely forgetting that the very same crowd that once screamed for freedom will now kneel for the promise of protection. And just like that, democracy consumes itself. This is what Plato saw. Not the shining utopia we're taught to worship, but a deeply sophisticated psychological trap. A system where mass emotion is engineered to become mass control. He didn't hate freedom. He respected it too much to watch it be so tragically abused. Because freedom without wisdom isn't freedom at all. It's license. It's recklessness. It's a mob without a map. And a mob without a map always, eventually, ends up begging for a king. This is why Plato didn't just reject democracy. He feared it. He believed it flatters the people right up until the moment it fails them. And by then, it's too late. Because the tyrant is already in power, and the crowd has already asked him to stay. So why, precisely, did Plato believe that democracy was an illusion? Because he saw something that we, even now, refuse to admit. The people don't choose what's best. They choose what feels good. They don't choose the most capable leader. They choose the one who tells them what they want to hear. And in a system where every vote is equal, the loudest voice, not the wisest mind, always wins. That's not a meritocracy. That's marketing. Plato saw politics transforming into theater and leaders devolving into actors. He saw elections becoming contests of performance, where the goal isn't to serve, but to seduce, not to lead, but to flatter, not to speak truth, but to repeat what the masses already believe. And so, democracy becomes a mirror, not a compass. It simply reflects the crowd's existing desires back to them until no one knows where north is anymore. It gives people the illusion of power while making them ever more dependent on those who sell them that illusion. That's how you keep a system alive, not by force, but by feedback. Not by silencing people, but by overwhelming them with choices that ultimately mean nothing. Because in the end, you don't need to silence the people if you can just keep them distracted. Plato wrote that when a democracy matures, truth becomes irrelevant. All that matters is what feels true. And, in a society addicted to feeling, facts die a quiet death. Truth becomes relative. Opinions become sacred. Expertise becomes elitist. Emotion becomes law. And the people, the very same people who demanded freedom, now live inside an echo chamber of their own creation. They don't want to be challenged. They want to be validated. So they elect the politician who looks the part, says the right words, plays the right music, and promises the world with no price tag attached. They don't ask, is it true? They ask, do I like how it sounds? That's not democracy. That's consumer psychology. And Plato saw it clearly. He said that when citizens stop valuing truth, when they reward charisma over competence, they become easy to control. Because the best way to control a crowd is to give them a story they want to hear. And in a democracy, those who craft the story win. But the people think they made the decision. They think they're in charge. They think the system reflects their will. That is the final illusion, the most seductive lie, the mass delusion. Because when a system feeds you only the options it approves of, and you pick one, you feel free, but you were never free. You were just allowed to choose the packaging. And that's how democracy becomes its own disguise. Plato didn't call it evil, he called it unstable. Because a society built on feelings has no foundation. It sways with the wind. It follows the herd. It rewards those who manipulate the mood of the moment. And slowly, the line between leader and entertainer disappears. The man with vision is too complex, too slow, too uncomfortable. But the man with charm, he wins in seconds. That's not an accident. That's how democracy is designed. It gives you just enough choice to feel powerful, without ever letting you touch real power. And once you believe the show is real, once you think the illusion is truth, you'll defend the system that's keeping you asleep. You'll praise your cage. You'll protect your captors. You'll fight for the mask and forget the face. That's the danger Plato saw. Not in tyranny itself, but in the freedom that forgets itself. Because once the people believe their voice is truth and their feelings are law, they become ungovernable and, paradoxically, easily governed. Mass delusion doesn't need to be forced. It just needs to be believed. And the more people who believe in it, the stronger the illusion becomes. It would be easy to dismiss Plato's warning if it didn't describe our modern world so perfectly. He warned that a democracy left unchecked would become a theater of emotions, where truth is irrelevant and power belongs to the most persuasive performer. So who controls that machine? Who decides which voices rise and which ones disappear? Who funds the campaigns? Who owns the networks? Who trains the algorithm that curates your digital world and filters what truths you're allowed to see? The answer isn't a single villain, it's a system. One built on two pillars: emotional control and informational control. First, emotional control. You don't need to be silenced if you can be stirred up. Anger is easier to manage than thinking. That's why outrage is free. It spreads faster, it sells better, it keeps you busy while the real decisions are made elsewhere. Second, informational control. You only see what the system wants you to see, not because it bans the truth, but because it buries it. It floods you with noise, with clickbait, with drama, with 20 versions of the same empty idea. And somewhere in that flood, the truth drowns, quietly. That's not democracy, that's design. Because when your attention is hijacked, your choices aren't free, they're directed. You're not voting with knowledge, you're reacting with emotion. And the people behind that curtain, they don't care who wins the vote. They care that you believe you chose. That belief, that illusion of control, is what keeps the game going. Because if you ever stopped believing, you might start asking questions. You might start unplugging. You might stop playing. And that's what the system fears most. So instead, it keeps feeding you the lie that this year is different, that this candidate is real, that your side finally has the answers. Meanwhile, nothing changes. Nothing real gets fixed. But the illusion gets stronger. Because when you vote out of fear, you don't challenge the system, you reinforce it. When you vote based on slogans, you don't disrupt the game, you validate it. And every time you do, the machine gets smarter, more targeted, more persuasive. It learns how to guide you without force, without censorship, without chains. All it needs is for you to keep playing. So ask yourself, when was the last time you chose something not because it felt good, but because it was true? When was the last time a politician told you something that made you uncomfortable, and you voted for them anyway? When was the last time you felt that your vote was truly yours? Because maybe you never did. Maybe you've only ever chosen between two versions of the same prison, and the system made you feel grateful that at least this time you got to pick the wallpaper. Plato didn't offer a conspiracy theory. He offered a solution, one we've ignored for over 2,000 years. He didn't call for tyranny. He didn't want power centralized in the hands of one man. He wanted something harder, something almost impossible. He wanted wisdom to lead. He proposed the idea of philosopher kings, leaders who didn't seek power, but accepted it as a burden. Leaders trained in logic, ethics, discipline, not marketing, not charm, not performance. Because he believed the only people who could be trusted with power were those who didn't crave it. And the ones who craved it should never be allowed near it. Why? Because the masses are easily moved, not by reason, but by emotion, not by facts, but by fear, envy, and desire. The crowd doesn't think in principles, it thinks in impulses. It demands comfort, not truth, security, not challenge, excitement, not clarity. And that's why the crowd always chooses the most flattering liar. Plato believed that if a society wanted to survive, truly survive, it had to stop rewarding illusion and start cultivating wisdom. That's why he wrote, "Until philosophers rule as kings, or kings become philosophers, cities will never rest from their evils." This wasn't utopian dreaming, it was brutal realism. Plato knew that most people don't want to rule themselves. They want to be ruled gently, cleverly, quietly. So the only safeguard was to place power in the hands of those who could see past the noise, those who weren't blinded by tribalism, those who didn't fear truth, those who didn't serve the crowd but served the good. But that kind of leadership requires a different kind of citizen, not just one who votes, but one who thinks. Not just one who reacts, but one who reflects. Plato's solution wasn't just about rulers, it was about all of us. He believed mass delusion would collapse only when individuals reclaim their minds. Only when people stop living through headlines and start wrestling with first principles. Only when we stop asking, "What do I feel right now?" and start asking what is actually true. Now, look around. Look at our elections, our debates, our leaders. The one who speaks plainly gets ignored. The one who speaks honestly gets hated. And the one who says what feels good gets elected. We no longer vote for leaders. We vote for celebrities. We vote for packaging, not substance. We vote for confidence, not competence. We vote for symbols, not solutions. Because we've been trained to trust the show, not the soul behind it. That's not an accident. That's the result of decades of emotional engineering. Politics today is not about policies. It's about optics, narratives, and feel. Good slogans that sound deep but mean nothing. Build back better. Make it great again. Hope, change, forward. Forward where? No one asks, because we're not thinking, we're reacting. And Plato warned that a society that rewards emotion over reason will inevitably collapse into tyranny, not because it wants to, but because it doesn't know how to stop it. Today, the tools of mass delusion are far more advanced. We don't just have orators, we have algorithms. We don't just have manipulators. We have machines that know what you fear before you do. They track your clicks, your pauses, your heart rate. They A/B test headlines to see which lie you'll share the fastest. They design speeches not to inform you, but to trigger you. You think you're deciding. You're not. You're being nudged, shaped, steered. You're not the citizen anymore. You're the data set, the product, the experiment. And the platforms that feed you this illusion, they know exactly what they're doing. Because when you're angry, you stay online longer. When you're scared, you share more. When you feel righteous, you stop thinking. So they give you leaders who don't lead, but perform. They cry on cue. They point fingers. They speak in sound bites. They build enemies to make you feel united. And all the while, the system runs on, untouched. Because it doesn't care who you vote for. It only cares that you keep playing the game, that you keep believing your vote still matters. Plato said when flatterers become leaders and philosophers are mocked, democracy collapses into tyranny. Is that not today? The flatterers smile for the cameras, and the philosophers write books no one reads. The crowd cheers louder as the ship drifts further, and when it all falls apart, we'll ask, how did this happen? But deep down, we'll know, because Plato already told us. He told us that democracy doesn't die with violence. It dies with applause, with hashtags, with unity rallies led by liars. It dies when the people stop thinking and start following. It dies when truth becomes hate speech, when silence is labeled violence, when thinking for yourself is seen as dangerous. It dies when emotion becomes law and reason becomes treason. So if this still feels like democracy to you, ask yourself, can you still say what you really think? Can you still vote for someone who hasn't been pre-approved? Or are you just participating in a ritual meant to make you feel free while keeping you perfectly controlled? Because Plato was right, and we are the living proof. By now you might be wondering, if democracy is a show, then who's writing the script? You were told you choose your leaders, that your voice matters, that your vote makes a difference. But let's be honest, do you really feel like the system changes, no matter who's in charge? Do you feel more free, or just more exhausted? Because what if the real game wasn't about who you vote for, but about how you're made to vote? Plato warned us, the people always choose the most charming liar, not the most capable, not the most honest. The one who flatters, the one who entertains, the one who mirrors your pain and then sells it back to you as hope. That's not leadership, that's manipulation. And the people, they think they're choosing freely, but they're only choosing between two illusions, two brands, two carefully engineered personalities, both approved by the same machine. He wanted citizens who valued discipline over dopamine, clarity over comfort, responsibility over rage. Because the system isn't just broken because of bad politicians. It's broken because too many people want to be comforted, not awakened. And a democracy full of unawakened minds will always choose its next manipulator. Always. So Plato's answer wasn't easy. It wasn't popular. It wasn't flashy. It was this. Train your soul, sharpen your reason, reject the mob, and serve what is good, whether it feels good or not. Because only when wisdom rules can anything else work. Otherwise, you're not living in a society. You're living in a casino, a theater, a simulation. And you'll keep spinning the wheel, hoping for different results, while the house always wins. The truth is, Plato wasn't against democracy. He was against fake freedom, emotion-led politics, mass delusion disguised as virtue. He didn't want fewer choices. He wanted better minds, making them, because if the people stay shallow, so will their leaders. And shallow leadership always leads to deep collapse. You can't control the system. You can't rewrite the rules overnight or make the crowd suddenly value truth. You can't change the media, the algorithms, or the billions of dollars behind the illusion. But you can do something far more powerful. You can stop believing it. You can choose to see through the script. You can choose not to clap when the actors walk on stage. You can choose to step back and ask real questions. Because freedom was never about the vote. It was about the mind that casts it. And most people aren't free up here. They believe what's popular. They say what's safe. They live by consensus, not by conscience. They confuse agreeing with thinking. They confuse comfort with truth. And when all you do is agree with the crowd, you stop existing. You become a reflection, a reaction, a well-behaved echo. Plato didn't fight that system with revolution. He fought it with philosophy, with clarity, with questions that pierced the surface of mass belief. Because when your mind is your own, you're no longer ruled. You might still live in the system, but the system no longer lives in you. And that's the beginning of true freedom. Don't call it democracy just because you got to pick between two options someone else designed. Don't call it choice if both roads lead to the same cage. Don't call it freedom if it requires you to shut off your critical mind just to feel like you belong. Ask yourself, am I living freely or am I just well adapted to a mass illusion? Because the truth is harsh. Most people don't want to be free. They want to be safe. They want to be liked. They want to be told they're on the right side. And the system gives them that, as long as they never question it. But if you're still watching this, you already feel something different. You've started to sense that the game is rigged, that the crowd is lost, that there's something deeply wrong with the way we've defined freedom. Plato wasn't against the people. He was against their manipulation. He didn't hate democracy. He hated the version of it that flatters ignorance and punishes awareness. Because when awareness dies, so does liberty. So if anything in this video made you uncomfortable, don't run from it. That's the first sign you're waking up. That's the first crack in the illusion. And from that crack, light gets in. Don't waste it. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to be popular. You don't need to be right. You just need to be clear. So if you've chosen clarity over comfort today, say it below. I choose clarity over comfort. And remember, you don't change the system by becoming its enemy. You change it by refusing to let it define what's real for you. The ballot is not your mind. The system is not your soul. The crowd is not your compass. Only you can reclaim your mind. Only you can walk out of the illusion quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. That's where freedom begins. And no one, not a vote, not a flag, not a crowd can take that from you.